I crashed into an alien world. Now she wants my bloodline.
The stranger from the sea. The first thing EMT Buford felt was the cold. It wasn't just cold, it was cruel. The kind that bit into muscle and bone, each icy wave slamming against him like the fist of a giant. Salt water clawed at his throat as he fought the crushing dark around him, every kick of his legs a desperate plea for air. The ocean didn't care. It had no mercy, no conscience, only the relentless pull downward into its lightless depths. Somewhere above, far beyond the black curtain of seawater, sunlight still existed. He remembered seeing it moments before everything went wrong, the morning star, his small but reliable spacecraft tearing through the alien planet's atmosphere in a blaze of plasma. Then came the warning sirens, the hull breach, the frantic dash to the escape pod, and finally the plunge. His last memory before unconsciousness claimed him was the emergency pod's hatch slamming shut as the sea swallowed it whole. Light, warmth, air. He woke to the gentle lapping of waves against the shore, each one rolling over him like a whisper from another world. His eyes cracked open, greeted by the sting of sunlight and the endless blue sky above. For a long moment, he lay still, breathing in the air, greedily tasting salt on his tongue. Coughing violently, EMT rolled onto his side, spitting seawater onto wet sand. His chest rose and fell in ragged bursts, every breath reminding him he was still alive. His brown hair, normally a windswept, deliberate mess, clung to his forehead in sodden strands, and his beard was crusted with salt. His boots were gone, his shirt nowhere to be seen. Only his grey cargo pants clung stubbornly to his body. Perfect way to start first contact, he muttered hoarsely, scanning the horizon. The emergency beacon, gone, probably resting somewhere at the bottom of the alien ocean. The morning star itself was lost, and judging by the storm clouds beginning to gather far out at sea, he wouldn't have much time to figure out his next move. That's when the shadow fell over him. At first, he thought it was the shape of a cloud passing overhead, but this shadow had weight, a presence. Slowly, EMT lifted his head, squinting against the glare of sunlight, and froze. Standing over him was the most striking figure he had ever seen, and EMT Buford had seen plenty, having served in more than one alien first contact mission. But this was different. Her skin was a deep, shimmering emerald, catching the sunlight and refracting it like polished jade. Her clothing was minimal, a series of fabric strips and leather cords clearly salvaged from whatever wreckage or environment she could find. The effect was both practical and undeniably alluring, every piece chosen for movement for survival, yet leaving glimpses of the body beneath. Her eyes were the most startling, large, feline in shape, and glowing faintly as if lit from within. She studied him without shame, the way a hunter might examine unfamiliar prey. When she crouched beside him, EMT tensed instinctively, but her hand, when it touched his chest, was unexpectedly warm. Gentle. Hello there, EMT said, trying to keep his voice steady. I come in peace. The alien woman tilted her head, a faint knowing smile curving her lips. She leaned closer, her scent washing over him, wild blossoms, carried on a sea breeze. For a heartbeat, EMT wondered if this was it. If this was how he'd die, not from drowning, but becoming lunch for a predator disguised as a goddess. Instead, she pressed her palm more firmly over his heart. Then she took his hand and guided it to her own chest. Beneath her skin, he felt the rapid, powerful beat of her heart. Same, she said, her accent heavy, the words unfamiliar yet unmistakable. EMT's brow furrowed. You can speak my language. She nodded once. Little. Learned from others long ago. That made EMT's head snap up. Others, you mean? There have been humans here before. Her expression shifted, growing distant. Few, very few, all gone now. She fixed her gaze on him again. You stay. He tried to sit up, but her hand pressed against his chest, firm as steel. Look, I appreciate the welcome, he said cautiously, but I really need to find my ship. No ship, she interrupted, shaking her head. She gestured toward the ocean. Gone. deep water. Her eyes narrowed as she looked toward the gathering storm. Storm coming! Need shelter! As if on cue, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the horizon. EMT glanced from the dark clouds to her unreadable face. She wasn't wrong, survival came first. Questions could wait. All right, he conceded. Lead the way. She helped him to his feet, with surprising strength, her slender frame belying the raw power in her grip. Together they moved along the shoreline, her bare feet leaving barely a trace in the wet sand. I'm EMT, he said, tapping his chest. Do you have a name? She considered this. Naira, she said at last, a word flowing from her lips like music. In your words. Hunter of stars. The name fit her perfectly. The path from the beach wound upward into jagged cliffs, where the remains of old structures clung to the rock face like barnacles. At first glance, they looked alien sharp angles, spiraling arches and materials that shimmered faintly under the sunlight. Yet, there was something oddly familiar in their design, as if they'd been built by someone trying to imitate Earth architecture without ever having seen it. Your home, EMT asked. Naira nodded. Was city. Long ago, now, just me. There was a quiet sorrow in her voice that made something in EMT's chest tighten. But she didn't linger on it. She led him into one of the structures, its arched entrance carved from pale stone, streaked with veins of glowing mineral. The moment they stepped inside, the sound of the ocean faded to a distant murmur. The interior surprised him, though ancient it was, cozy, salvaged furniture arranged with care, walls lit by clusters of bioluminescent plants, casting a soft blue glow. The air was warmer here, scented with salt and strange flowers. Rest, Naira said, gesturing toward a wide bed covered in layered fabrics. Storm long. We talk more. EMT said gingerly, mind racing with questions he didn't know how to begin asking. His survival instincts told him this woman, this being, was dangerous. But another part of him, one he didn't trust, was already wondering what she really wanted. That answer would come soon enough. Teeth in the storm. The wind had a voice now. Low at first, like a warning whispered from the sea, but rising with each passing heartbeat until it roared through the cliffside like an angry god. The ancient stone walls of Naira's dwelling groaned under the strained dust drifting from the ceiling in thin streams. EMT sat on the edge of the bed, his muscles aching from the crash, but his mind alert. Every soldier's instinct told him storms like this could hide more than just bad weather. Naira, he said, raising his voice over the growing howl. Why did you help me? What do you want from me? She was across the room tending to the soft glowing plants with slow, deliberate movements. The light wrapped around her emerald skin, painting her in shifting shades of blue and green. When she turned, there was no hesitation in her voice. My people! Dying, she said simply. Few left. Need. She paused, eyes narrowing as she searched for the right words. Need new blood. Strong blood. Her gaze dropped to his chest again, that warm, searching hand returning to rest over his heart. Human blood. EMT blinked, trying to decide whether to be flattered, alarmed, or both. Oh, he managed his voice halfway between surprise and disbelief. So this is a recruitment pitch. But before Naira could answer, the storm outside screamed, not with wind this time, but with something sharper, wilder, a sound that didn't belong to the weather. A piercing screech tore through the night, reverberating off the walls. EMT froze. It was followed by another lower, throatier, closer. What was that, he asked. Naira's expression darkened. Razorclaws, she said, the name curling off her tongue like a curse. Like your wolves. But bigger, faster, very hungry. EMT was already scanning the room for a weapon when she strode to a shadowed corner and pulled free a long spear of iridescent material. Without ceremony, she tossed it to him. He caught it easily, testing its weight. Perfectly balanced. I was a pilot, he said, but I've had basic combat training. Naira's lips twitched in something close to approval. She took up her own spear, a longer, heavier one, and spun it once in her hands with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. "Good," she said. "We fight together." The screeches grew closer now, accompanied by the scrape of claws against stone. The storm outside battered the ancient structure, but the predator's approach was louder still. "How many?" EMT asked, moving toward the entrance. "Pack," she replied. 6, maybe 8. Her nostrils flared and she shot him a glance that made his pulse jump. "You smell good." He blinked. "I what? My people?" "Sense battle scent," she said, still watching him. "Yours. Strong. Attractive." EMT almost dropped the spear. "That's good to know," he muttered. But there was no more time to talk. The first Razorclaw burst through the entrance in a spray of shattered stone. It was a nightmare-made flesh the size of a small horse, its body a coiled mass of muscle under sleek scale-like hide that shimmered wetly in the bioluminescent light. Its head was too long, its teeth too many, its eyes locked on them with pure predatory focus. EMT didn't think, he moved. The spear thrust forward in a perfect lunge, punching into the creature's shoulder. It let out a howl, thrashing back toward the storm blood hissing where it struck the floor. 2 more lunged in its place. Naira was already moving a blur of green and gold. Her spear flashed, stabbing deep into the neck of one Razorclaw before twisting free in a spray of dark fluid. Her tattered clothing snapped around her legs as she spun, pivoting to keep the other from flanking them. "Focus!" she called over the chaos, a grin flashing across her face even as she drove her weapon home again. "Watch death, not me." Hard not to, EMT muttered, stepping in to intercept a Razorclaw aiming for her back. His spear found its mark in the creature's ribs, the impact jarring his arms to the bone. They moved together as if they had fought side by side for years. When one was attacked, the other countered. When one advanced, the other covered. It wasn't strategy, it was instinct, something deeper, something neither of them could explain. By the time the last Razorclaw turned tail and fled into the storm, EMT was standing chest to chest with Naira. Both of them panting, their skin slick with rain and sweat, their spears dripping. "You fight well," she said, her voice husky. "For a human, you're not so bad yourself," EMT replied, glancing down at the sting in his arm. A deep scratch was already bleeding. Naira's eyes flicked to the wound. In an instant, her playful smirk was gone. "You hurt. Sit." He tried to wave her off, but she was already pulling strips of cloth from her own clothing. EMT's throat went dry, as more of her skin was revealed, smooth, luminous, alive in a way that made him forget for a moment the stinging in his arm. "You don't have to," he began. "Quiet," she ordered, binding the wound with firm, practiced hands. "My people not shy like humans. Body, natural, beautiful." Her fingers lingered on his arm, sending a small but unmistakable shiver through him. Somewhere outside, the storm still raged. But in here, something else had started to take root. Something as primal and dangerous as the creatures they had just driven off. Into the mountain's heart, the storm didn't ease with the death of the Razorclaws. If anything, it seemed angrier, as though the battle had stirred the elements themselves. The walls of Naira's cliffside home groaned under the gale's relentless assault, and somewhere above stone cracked with the sound of old bones giving way. EMT sat on the bed, where she'd patched his arm, the faint scent of her skin still lingering on the makeshift bandage. Naira moved silently through the chamber, retrieving the spears, extinguishing some of the plant lights to conserve their glow. She paused at the doorway, eyes narrowing as she studied a thin fissure snaking its way down the wall. "Not good," she murmured. He straightened. "What's wrong?" "Storm. Too strong. This place old." She pressed her hand flat against the stone, her eyes unfocused, as if she could feel the structure's weakness through her palm. "Need move deeper, to sacred places." Her tone shifted on those last 2 words, not fearful but reverent. EMT felt a flicker of curiosity, even as the soldier in him catalogued the risk. "Sacred places?" he asked, rising. "Where my people lived. Deep in mountain, safe." Then she fixed him with a piercing emerald gaze. "But first, must teach you important things about bonding. Bonding. The word made something in his chest tighten. She spoke it like a promise and a challenge. As they gathered supplies, spears, some bioluminescent plants, a few objects he didn't recognize, she spoke again. My people, bond different from humans, not just physical. She tapped her temple, here, then her chest, here, and she touched her sternum right where her heartbeat would be felt. Life force. Life force, EMT echoed, skeptical but intrigued. Yes. She glanced at him sidelong, her lips curving faintly. Must understand, before we... Her eyes swept deliberately over him, then back to meet his. Before we complete. Before he could answer, the storm gave a deep guttural roar. The ceiling groaned, and a spray of dust and pebbles rained down between them. Without thinking, EMT grabbed her arm, pulling her close as a fist-sized stone cracked against the floor where she had stood. Her body was warm, almost unnaturally so, against his. She didn't pull away. In fact, she leaned in, her voice a low purr. Lesson 1, she murmured, placing her palm over his chest again. Touch. Always meaningful. Always connection. A current rippled through him, sharp and warm at once, like static that somehow went deeper than the skin. I can feel something, he admitted, like electricity. Life force, she said, clearly pleased. They left the cliffside chamber, descending through a narrow, spiraling corridor that tunneled into the heart of the mountain. The deeper they went, the more the storm's voice faded, replaced by the quiet pulse of unseen currents in the walls. Naira led with the sure-footed grace of a predator, her bare feet silent on the stone. The walls themselves began to change from simple carved passages to vast chambers where crystals jutted from the rock like frozen lightning, glowing faintly in the dim. Finally, she stopped in a circular room whose walls were covered in luminescent markings. The light from the symbols painted their skin in shifting patterns. This, she said softly, first bonding chamber, where young ones learn traditions. She guided him to the center of the room and positioned him with the precision of someone arranging a ritual. Stand here. Close eyes. EMT hesitated. Why? Trust, she replied simply. He closed his eyes. He heard her footsteps circling him, the whisper of fabric against her skin, the soft sound of her breathing. Then her voice came slower now, rhythmic, almost ceremonial. My people believe, when two beings match, their energies dance. Her fingertips brushed his bare shoulders, tracing invisible shapes that sent shivers spiraling down his spine. He could feel her moving around him, a warm presence that seemed to bend the very air. This is why you chose me, he asked, eyes still closed. Because our energies dance. Partly, she admitted. Also because you are different. Strong, not afraid. Her hand found his again, their fingers intertwined. Open eyes. He did, and almost forgot to breathe. The crystals in the walls had flared to life, swirling with colors that bled into each other in patterns like liquid flame. Their combined glow reflected in her emerald skin, making her look otherworldly. Holy, beautiful, he whispered. Her lips quirked. Yes. But her eyes weren't on the walls, they were locked on him. She opened her mouth to speak again, but a deafening crack from above cut her off. The floor trembled, a rain of dust and grit falling from the ceiling. Naira's face hardened. Storm worse than thought. Must go deeper. But before they left, she crossed to a hidden alcove and retrieved something wrapped in translucent material. A scroll that shimmered faintly in the crystal light. History of my people, she explained. Important, you understand. They moved on deeper into the labyrinthine heart of the mountain. The corridors narrowed, then opened into larger halls where entire walls were veined with glowing crystal. As they walked, Naira translated from the scroll tales of a people called the Luminary Masters, of energy builders, of cities designed to harness the forces of nature. And then, she said, came the darkness, not a storm, but a sickness that drained life force itself. Entire islands emptied, civilizations dissolved, until only a scattered few survived. Her voice grew quieter. Only those with strongest life force remained. They emerged into a chamber, unlike any they had seen so far. Vast, with a pool of softly glowing liquid at its center, ringed by more crystals and strange alien devices. The air here felt thicker, charged, humming faintly. Third lesson, Naira said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Life force can be shared, stored, renewed. She dipped her hand into the pool, and the liquid pulsed with light at her touch. This is why humans. Perfect. Your life force. Extraordinary. EMT stepped forward, transfixed by the way the liquid seemed to respond to her. Is this why your people died? They didn't have enough. She nodded, partly, but also. Her head snapped toward the tunnel they'd entered from. A deep grinding rumble rolled through the floor. Cracks spider-webbed across the walls, and seawater began to seep through. Her voice was sharp now. Storm-breaking mountain, ocean coming in. The heart chamber. The water seeped in at first like an unwelcome guest. Thin rivulets trickling between the crystal-veined walls, pooling at EMT's boots. But within moments, those trickles became streams, and the streams became a rush, frothing white in the glow of the chamber's light. Naira didn't hesitate. She slung the scroll across her back, scooped up the glowing plants, and crossed the room to a small recess in the far wall. From it, she retrieved a crystal the size of her palm, not just glowing but pulsing its light in rhythm with her heartbeat. This, she said over the rising roar future. Must protect. The water was at EMT's knees now, icy and relentless. Then we need to move. Now. They ran. The labyrinth of tunnels twisted downward deeper into the mountain. Each passage they took seemed to slope steeper than the last, the air cooling, the walls tightening. Behind them, the flood pursued like a living thing, its roar growing louder, hungrier. Where are we going? EMT demanded, breathless. Heart chamber, Naira replied without slowing. Last sanctuary, strongest place, where new life, blessed. Her words were weighted, but the pounding of his heart from exertion, from the proximity of the flood, from her left little room to unpack them. The tunnels opened without warning into a vast circular chamber that took EMT's breath away. The heart chamber, its walls pulsed with light, not in the erratic shimmer of scattered crystals, but in a unified rhythm, as if the entire space were a single living organism. At the center rose a massive crystalline formation, a towering trunk of luminous stone that split into dozens of branching limbs, each one shedding threads of light that cascaded toward the floor like waterfalls. It was a tree. A crystal tree, vast and ancient, its roots fused into the chamber floor, its crown disappearing into darkness above. But the beauty was fleeting. Water was already spilling in through cracks near the floor. Naira turned to him, her face fierce, her eyes blazing with purpose. Must complete bond now, or all lost. Now, EMT said, glancing between her and the rushing water. In case you missed it, we are about to drown. Yes, now. She stepped close, pressing the crystal from her pouch into his hand. Trust me. There was no hesitation in her, no doubt. And looking into those glowing feline eyes, he found his own resistance crumbling. Okay, he said at last. Tell me what to do. She took his hand, leading him to the base of the crystal tree. Like before, but deeper. No fear, no doubt. When they both placed their palms against the glowing trunk, the reaction was immediate. The entire chamber erupted with light. Energy surged through EMT's body in a flood so pure it stole the breath from his lungs. He could feel her inside him, not physically, but in a way that defied language. Her thoughts brushed against his warm and sure. Her heartbeat echoed in his own chest. Every emotion, her urgency, her determination, her fierce will to protect, poured into him like a second bloodstream. By the stars, her voice whispered in his mind, awed. Your life force, so bright. The water reached their waists, but it stopped rising. The crystal tree's glow thickened into a barrier around them, a shimmering dome that held the flood at bay. EMT could see machinery hidden within the walls, sparking to life, ancient pumps stirring from centuries of slumber. Slowly, The water began to recede, but he could barely focus on the chamber. The connection between them was intoxicating. Every breath seemed shared, every pulse synchronized. He could feel the warmth of her joy as the danger receded, and beneath it, something more primal, a pull as ancient as the stars. "Look," Naira whispered aloud. The walls had come alive with moving light. Holographic images spun slowly in the air, cities of crystal, rising from ocean islands, the luminary thriving in a golden age of power and beauty. Then came the sickness, the fading, the scattering. And finally, a single image, a human and a luminary standing together beneath the branches of the crystal tree, their joined hands glowing. They knew she breathed. They knew one day you would come. Her eyes met his, and this time there was no guarded warrior's mask, no predator's challenge, only raw, unshielded need. The bond between them flared, and EMT knew with absolute certainty if he stepped back now the pull would tear him apart. The crystal tree's light dimmed to a softer, more intimate glow as Naira stepped closer, her palm finding its familiar place over his heart. "Bond, ready to complete," she murmured, her voice low, the words resonating in his chest as much as in his ears. Outside, the pumps groaned, and the last of the floodwater slipped away into the depths. Inside, in the shelter of the crystal's glow, the air between them felt charged, as though the storm had simply moved inside the chamber. The bond complete, the world beyond the heart chamber could have ended in fire or flood, and EMT wouldn't have noticed. All his focus, all his senses were drawn to the woman standing before him, her emerald skin awash in the crystal tree's light. Naira's breathing was slow, measured, but her eyes burned, not with the calculating assessment of a hunter, not with the guarded wariness of a survivor, but with a fierce, unguarded certainty. She had chosen him, and he had chosen her. "Bond ready to complete," she said again, softer this time, almost reverent. Her hand slid from his chest to join his against the crystal trunk. The surface felt alive now, warm, and subtly shifting like the slow pulse of something impossibly ancient. A hum rose in the air, not from the walls or the tree, but from inside him. From inside them both. Through the bond, her presence was no longer a distant spark, but a tidal wave of sensation. He could feel the rapid staccato of her heart, the electric thread of her anticipation, the depth of her loneliness held for years, and the hope he had lit in her without even knowing it. And she could feel him, the quiet resolve beneath his soldier's instincts, the awe he felt at her strength, the way every glance from her set his pulse surging. "Look at me," she murmured. He did, and in that gaze the rest of the world dissolved. Her free hand came up, brushing against his jaw with a touch that was both gentle and commanding. Her fingers lingered as if memorizing the shape of him. Then, without breaking eye contact, she stepped into him, their bodies aligning as naturally as if they had always been meant to fit. The crystal tree responded. Its glow swelled, spilling down its trunk, and around them in a slow-moving veil of light. The hum deepened into a low, resonant chord that seemed to vibrate through bone and blood. The air thickened with warmth, and every breath they took carried traces of the other's scent, ocean spray, alien blossoms, and something deeper, something uniquely theirs. She pressed her forehead to his. Now her voice whispered in his mind. The energy hit like a lightning strike wrapped in silk, blinding and soft all at once. A current shot through his palm into the crystal, looped back through her, and into him again, building on itself with each pulse until it was no longer just passing between them, but fusing. He was her heartbeat. She was his breath. Images flooded his mind, not memories but impressions, running through alien forests with her at his side, standing before a crowd of her people united, holding children whose faces blended their features. Laughter under alien skies. Battles fought shoulder to shoulder. Centuries of shared life compressed into an instant. And beneath it all, that deep, inexhaustible current of desire, not a fleeting spark but a constant fire that would never cool. When the connection steadied, they were no longer just touching hands. They were holding each other, wrapped in the crystal's glow bodies pressed close. The rhythm of their breathing matched perfectly. "It is done," she whispered aloud, her voice husky. "Then why do I feel like it's just starting?" He asked, his own voice rougher than he expected. Her answering smile was radiant. "Because now we share everything. Thoughts, feelings, strength." Her hand slid down to rest over his ribs, and he felt the faint curl of amusement in her mind before she spoke. Even hunger. The crystal tree dimmed its light, as if giving them privacy. EMT didn't know whether that was deliberate or just another ancient mechanism responding to life force patterns, but he didn't care. When her lips found his, the bond flared like the first surge of a supernova. Every nerve lit up, every muscle tightened, every fragment of his awareness was hers. And when her hands gripped his shoulders, pulling him closer, the thought that this had begun with a crash into an alien sea seemed almost laughably distant. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just the simple absolute knowledge that whatever this was, it was not temporary, not fragile, it was permanent. When the light finally softened again, they were on the moss-like growth at the base of the crystal, tangled together in a way that left no space between them. The bond hummed in the background, like a heartbeat that would never fade. Her head rested against his chest, her breathing slow and steady. Now she murmured, always connected. He smoothed a hand along her hair, still trying to process the enormity of what had happened, but feeling no fear in it. Only the strange, fierce comfort of knowing they were in some impossible way one. The longest days, time lost its meaning in the heart chamber. Maybe it was the constant soft pulse of the crystal tree, or the way its light never dimmed entirely, making day and night indistinguishable. Or maybe it was simply that EMT Buford had never lived a life so far removed from duty rosters and mission clocks. Whatever the reason, he and Naira fell into a rhythm that was equal parts exploration, repair, and distraction. Day 1 or maybe 2, the storm above had finally faded, but they hadn't left the heart chamber. EMT kept telling himself it was to ensure structural safety, to map the space and understand the luminary systems. But Naira had her own interpretation. "Storm gone," she purred, circling behind him as he studied a floating holographic panel. "Plenty of time for other things. We should check the stabilizers," he countered, scanning the ancient readouts. Her fingers brushed his spine, a light, deliberate touch. "Stabilizers wait bond, not wait." Through the bond, he felt the ripple of mischief under her words, a heat curling around his thoughts that made focusing on alien engineering very difficult. Day 3 or maybe 5, they began exploring the complex beyond the heart chamber. The crystal tree wasn't just a monument, it was the heart of an entire network of corridors and chambers, each with its own function. Some were gardens glowing with bioluminescent plants that thrived without sunlight. Others held strange machinery that hummed faintly when approached, as if recognizing their presence. One chamber held a device that, when activated, materialized furniture from pure energy. EMT was examining its controls when Naira appeared at his side, still glowing faintly from their last bond reinforcement. "Perfect for nursery," she said, laying a hand on her still flat belly. He looked at her sharply. "You're already thinking about—" Her smile turned positively predatory. "Practice makes perfect." They'd stopped counting. They found what must have been the luminary medical base, sleek surfaces, hovering diagnostic arrays, and a central platform that pulsed softly when approached. The systems were still functional, scanning them both and displaying a dizzying array of biological data. Naira studied the holographic results. "Says human luminary, very compatible, strong offspring likely." She glanced up at him, her eyes gleaming. "Also says, frequent bonding increases chances." EMT crossed his arms. "Define frequent." She stepped into his space, her glow brightening. "Show you." The breaks became routine. In the beginning, he'd tried to set clear work periods, mornings for exploration, afternoons for system calibration, evenings for rest. But Naira's definition of rest was flexible, and soon mornings and afternoons blurred into a continuous loop of activity that left both the complex and their bond thriving. Through the bond, EMT learned that luminary passion was not just physical. Every touch, every shared breath fed the energy loop between them, strengthening both partners. And every time the crystal tree pulsed in harmony with them, the entire chamber seemed to grow warmer, more alive. Humor crept in. One evening or morning, he wasn't sure. EMT tried to focus on deciphering a complex schematic projected on the wall. "We should see what this controls," he said, tracing the alien symbols. Later Naira replied, already pulling him away from the console. He arched a brow. This could be critical too. She silenced him with a kiss that carried both amusement and challenge through the bond. "Convince me it's more important than this," her mind voice teased. Needless to say, the schematic waited. The heart chamber changed too. The crystal tree's glow grew richer, its roots extending into more of the surrounding rooms. The moss-like growth at its base thickened into a soft living carpet. EMT swore the air itself seemed warmer, more oxygen-rich. It was as if the tree recognized the bond as a kind of activation key and was responding by reshaping their sanctuary into a true home. Naira noticed it too. One evening, they sat at the tree's base, sharing food from the glowing gardens. She leaned back, watching the branches with narrowed eyes. "Tree, happier now," she said. "Feels us, grows for us." For us, EMT echoed, tasting the weight of the word. It no longer felt strange. By the time they discovered a second living level, beneath the heart chamber, complete with vast open spaces and environmental controls, EMT realized something. This wasn't just survival anymore. They were building something here, something permanent. And if the way Naira looked at him was any indication, they were nowhere near done, reinforcing the bond that would make it possible. New life. They were in the heart chamber when it happened. Not during a battle, not while exploring some distant corridor, but here where their bond had been forged, where the crystal tree's light wrapped around them like a living embrace. It began with a subtle change in the bond. EMT felt it first, a faint, unfamiliar thread, weaving through their shared current. Softer than her warrior's fire, warmer than her teasing sparks. He froze, sensing it fully for the first time. Naira, he thought. And through the bond, her attention snapped to him. She felt it too. Her eyes widened, the usual fierce glint giving way to something raw and unguarded. Slowly, almost reverently, she pressed his hand to her belly. "Life," she whispered aloud. "New life." The crystal tree reacted instantly. Its roots pulsed with brighter light, the branches above flaring into an aurora of shifting colors. The hum deepened, resonating through the chamber floor and into their bodies, until EMT could swear it was echoing inside his own heartbeat. Across the walls, the holographic displays shifted from static history to fluid patterns. DNA spirals, energy loops, growth projections. One symbol repeated itself again and again, a stylized fusion of two beings becoming one. Through the bond, Naira's emotion hit him in waves. Joy so fierce, it was almost overwhelming relief, like the breaking of a long siege, and pride that swelled until it threatened to lift them both off the ground. But there was something else in her mind too, determination. "This is the first," she told him silently, "not the last." He managed a half smile, though his chest felt tight. "You're already planning siblings." Her lips curved into that predatory grin he knew too well. "Luminary strong families, big families," and she pressed closer, the glow of her skin warming his bare chest. Bond reinforcement, enjoyable. The next days became a strange balance of work and wonder. They explored the deeper levels of the complex, guided now not just by curiosity, but by the instinct to prepare. The environmental controls in the lower chambers were adjusted for perfect humidity and temperature. New gardens were seeded, with both luminary plants and edible crops from EMT's emergency supplies. And the crystal tree, it kept changing. The moss at its base expanded, growing thicker and softer, almost like it was shaping a cradle. Its glow became gentler in the evenings, warm enough to soothe, bright enough to comfort. "It knows," Naira said one night. as they sat watching the branches sway in unseen currents. It feels the new one. The bond itself was different now. Before, it had been a constant current of shared sensation and thought, occasionally flaring into something overwhelming when they touched or fought side by side. Now there was a third pulse, faint but steady, like a smaller flame sheltered between theirs. Sometimes when EMT rested his hand over her belly, he swore he could feel a flicker of emotion there. Not a thought, not a word, just a presence, a spark waiting to catch. "You feel too?" she asked one morning, her voice quieter than usual. "Yeah," he said softly. "Feels curious." Naira smiled in a way he'd never seen before, less the warrior, more the mother. Good, strong mind already. Their work became more focused. The heart chamber was already a sanctuary, but now they began turning it into a home. The newly discovered living quarters below were furnished with the energy crafting device. The gardens expanded. The medical chamber was calibrated specifically for hybrid physiology. Through all of it, the bond kept feeding them small bursts of shared amusement, wordless encouragement and flashes of anticipation for the life to come. On the eve of the first new storm since the flood, they stood at the observation alcove, watching distant lightning arc over the ocean. EMT's arm was around her shoulder, her head resting against him. The crystal tree's glow reflected in the water far below. "This place," he said quietly, "it was meant to last, even if your people couldn't." She turned her face toward him, her eyes steady. "With you, with this bond, it will." The first of many, the months passed in a rhythm that belonged entirely to the heart chamber. Days of quiet preparation, nights of whispered connection, and always the crystal tree's steady, luminous heartbeat in the background. Naira's glow had deepened with each passing week. The closer the birth came, the more radiant she became, a living beacon, her skin alight as though the child within her had already begun to share its life force outward. "You're beautiful," EMT told her one evening, his palm resting over the curve of her belly. She gave him that mischievous grin he'd come to expect. "Still want me, like this?" He didn't answer with words. The bond was enough. The day came with a storm, not the violent world-breaking kind that had first driven them into the mountain, but a heavy rain-swept gale that rattled the outer cliffs. Inside, the crystal tree pulsed brighter, its roots thrumming in time with Naira's breathing. "It's time," she said, simply gripping his hand. The luminary birthing systems activated automatically, the medical chamber blooming with soft light, the air thick with oxygen-rich warmth. Energy fields shimmered around them, protective and steady, while the moss underfoot became as soft as water. EMT stayed beside her through every moment, the bond amplifying not just her pain, but her strength. He felt the force of her will as clearly as his own heartbeat, each contraction a battle she refused to lose. When the cry came, it wasn't like a human newborn's wail. It was a note of pure, ringing life, the sound harmonizing with the crystal tree's pulse. Their son was perfect. His skin was a pale jade, traced with shifting starlight patterns. His eyes, when they opened, were deep brown with a faint inner glow, his father's gaze lit by his mother's fire. Naira cradled him, her expression soft in a way EMT had rarely seen. "Strong," she murmured. "Beautiful." "What do we call him?" EMT asked. She thought for a moment. "Adrien means from the sea, in your words, where we began." The heart chamber changed again. Over the days that followed, the crystal tree spread its influence into every corner of the sanctuary. New passages opened to reveal nurseries, bathed in constant, gentle light. Gardens adapted, producing richer food. The holographic systems began displaying hybrid developmental charts, almost as if the tree had rewritten its programming to care for the child. Adrien's presence rippled through the bond, adding a third steady heartbeat to the current EMT and Naira shared. Sometimes, while the baby slept, they would both feel flashes of raw joy, curiosity, or contentment, each pulse of it brightening the crystal tree's glow. But the prophecy was never far from Naira's mind. One evening, as Adrien slept in a cradle of living moss, She brought EMT to the holographic display that had first shown the human luminary union. This time, the images went further, showing children with Adrian's features growing into leaders, explorers, bridge builders between scattered luminary enclaves. A generation later, the images showed thriving cities, both human and luminary, in design rising along the coasts and mountains. And always at their center, the crystal tree. They saw this, Naira said quietly. They knew. EMT watched the projection, the weight of it settling in his chest. Then we'd better make sure it happens. The elder appeared. The crystal tree's core flared, and a holographic figure stepped into view, an ancient luminary elder, robed in light. You have done what centuries of my people could not, the elder said. You have united strength and passion, determination and life force. This child is the first step. Many must follow. EMT raised an eyebrow. How many are we talking about? The elder's smile was calm, certain. At least 5. To establish a stable genetic foundation. Beside him, Naira's eyes gleamed. 5. Minimum, she echoed, her skin already warming against his. The elder faded politely, leaving them alone with the implication. Years later, the sanctuary had grown into a true settlement. Adrian, now tall and strong for his age, could weave energy spheres between his hands with ease. Naira's belly swelled again, their second child almost ready to join them. And in the projection alcove, the future kept unfolding, generations of hybrids spreading across the islands, reclaiming the oceans, carrying both human ingenuity and luminary strength into a new golden age. One evening, as they stood beneath the crystal tree's endless glow, EMT looked at her and thought of the first moment he'd seen her, a shadow over his face on a sunlit beach, a hand pressed to his heart. Funny, he said softly. You were supposed to be the hunter. I think I caught you instead. Her laugh curled through the bond like warm light. No, she said, eyes gleaming. We caught each other. And the crystal tree, ancient witness, silent guardian, pulsed in agreement, marking the beginning of a future that would change not just one world, but the stars themselves.